Thank you for joining us for our last session of our Water Talk speaker series. Our guest speaker is Mr. Rene Mariscal. Mr. Mariscal is a Rio Grande Valley native. He is a graduate of the University of Texas in Austin and holds a Bachelor of Science with a concentration in Ecology, Evolution, and Conservation. Mr. Mariscal is currently the Water Resource Manager for the Brownsville Public Utilities Board. He has served as a Water Resource Manager since his appointment in 2011. Prior to his appointment, he served as an Environmental Manager for PUB for approximately 6 years. He has been with PUB for nearly 20 years. Prior to PUB, he worked for the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality in the Austin, Corpus Christi, and Harlingen offices. Without further ado, Mr. Mariscal.
Thank you for joining us. It's a great opportunity. Anytime I get an opportunity like this to talk about the project, it's exciting for me. It's a project that I'm really excited about, and every time I get an opportunity to pass on the information, I hope everybody takes. It's a unique project that we have going here in Brownsville, and I'll talk a little bit about it. Feel free to ask questions during the presentation, and if not, afterwards. One of the things that we're going to do as soon as we're done with the project, for any of you that are interested, we're going to go visit our dewatering site, and that's located just a couple of blocks away. But for those of you that can't make it, I will have a couple of videos so you can see what the process is like. I'll cover a little bit of background. I know at least some of you are familiar with the project. I'll touch on a little bit of the background for the project, the benefits of the project, our operation, and some of the work that we're working with other entities such as the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, seeking funding grants for the project. First of all, about PUB, we're municipally owned. We have the City Commission appoints the board members. There's 7 board members and includes the mayor. We have electric, water, wastewater services, approximately about 570 employees, but that changes from day to day, and about 64,000 customers, plus our revenue. Revenue changes as well from year to year. So resacas, for those of you that are not familiar with resacas, resacas are distributaries of the Rio Grande River, okay? Their natural flow has been cut off over the years. Natural rain events, hurricane events would feed these waterways, these resacas, similar to oxbows, but not exactly an oxbow. So those natural flows have been cut off over the years by levees. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers constructed levees to protect, the communities here in the valley. So they've been cut off. So what we do now, different entities feed these waterways. PUB feeds some sections of these resacas here in Brownsville. Irrigation districts, such as Cameron County Irrigation District 6 and the Brownsville Irrigation Districts. We all feed these waterways typically on a daily basis. At least from our end, we're feeding the resacas on a daily basis. Again, they're managed by various entities. So hurricane on its way, the different entities, we communicate with each other, and we have the ability to lower the resacas as well. Although, albeit at a very slow pace, we're able to lower resacas and at the same time increase levels. Over 50 miles of resacas within Brownsville. If you look at the other resacas outside of Brownsville, Los Fresnos, San Benito, you're talking way over 70 miles of resacas throughout the Cameron County. But here within Brownsville, approximately 50 miles. At PUB, our primary source of water is the Rio Grande River. You see it here, but up here, Rio Grande River, and that feeds our 2 reservoirs. From our reservoirs, we then have the ability to feed the resacas. The water, from a utility standpoint, we have to order our water from, we reach out to the IBWC, International Boundary Water Commission, and we order the water for the community, we have to order the water 7 days in advance. And once we order the water 7 days in advance, we're able to store water. We have a capacity of roughly about 7 days at our reservoirs. This is a map of the city of Brownsville. In red are the city limits. And really what I'm trying to point out here are the three resaca systems that I'll be talking about. The town resaca system, which is the one closest to us. Resaca de la Guerra runs across the city. And then on the northern end, closer to Alton Glore, is Resaca del Rancho Viejo. Resaca del Rancho Viejo actually runs a little further north. It stretches all the way to Olvito and Rancho Viejo. So those are the three systems. I'll mention the town resaca system, some of the work that we're doing down here. Quite frankly, our dredging work has all been concentrated down here. But then some of the work, some of the studies and grant funding that we're seeking will help cover some of these other resacas. Resaca de la Guerra and del Rancho Viejo. And there it is again. It's an aerial view, Rio Grande River. We pump to our reservoirs, and from here we're able to feed resacas. So the benefits of the resaca restoration of this project, the resacas essentially have been silting in over years. A lot of these resacas, really, quite frankly, the majority, if not the entirety of the resacas, has really never been dredged to the level that we're dredging now. You may have some individual homeowners who may have gone back there with an excavator or backhoe and cleaned up their areas. But for the most part, these resacas have been silting in over the years. The original, one of the elements of the project is to dredge, get back to the normal levels, normal depth. This is a cross-section of resaca at Dean Porter Park here nearby, town resaca system. And what this illustrates is every little gray square is essentially a foot, and the gray is the silt, and then the level. We've already dredged this, and so essentially when we had maybe a foot or two, depending on the area of water, we now have, it's a bit deeper now, 6, 7 feet, 9 as a matter of fact, at Dean Porter Park in some pockets. So that's the goal. So by doing that, we improve the water capacity. We're able to store water in one of these resacas, so that also provides the utility with additional water storage. Go ahead.
How long did it take to silt in, or how long will it take to do it again?
So to silt in, clearly that's been over years, possibly, since they were created. They've been silting in, yeah. So back to your second part of the question, how long before we have to go back? We have 50 miles, and given our current staffing and budget, we suspect it would take us about 50 years to get to all of them. And so the idea would be that unless you double up your staffing, well, then you cut your time in half and so forth. But the idea is to at least work our way through all these segments and eventually, probably restart the process. Yeah, go ahead.
Should we ask questions?
Yeah, ask questions.
On the 3 color code legends that you gave earlier,
Yes.
do you know which ones are natural and which are man-made?
Yeah, for the most part, what you see here are natural resacas. You will find little pockets in different areas that are man-made, but we're focusing primarily on the natural resacas. Yeah, you'll see little pockets here and there, neighborhoods that went and created their own resacas. Okay, so additional benefits. Not only do we have storage capacity, when it rains here in Brownsville, a lot of it drains into the resacas. So by dredging, again, you're creating that not only water storage capacity, but it also helps with your drainage. Helps provide that additional storm drainage. Improves water quality. I mean, literally, some resacas it's mud, right? It's sediment, low dissolved oxygen levels because you have very little water. Summer it's really hot. You have low dissolved oxygen. By dredging, you help improve the water quality. Economic development benefits. A lot of folks have businesses with a resaca in the back. Certainly having nice, clean. It's part of the aesthetics here in Brownsville as well.
If your backyard is the resaca, are there restrictions to use it, or are there some that are restricted and some are not?
For the most part, and this the property owner, it depends on the location, but property owners are going to own, a lot of times it's halfway of the resaca. In some cases, it's the entire resaca. So it's really the property owners.
I wasn't specific, I'm sorry. Can they water their grass? Can they put a pump and put it?
Oh, yes. Yeah. If you have a resaca, your back property, you can go. Right, at least here within the City of Brownsville. Yeah, let me take that back. There's certain sections that are under the jurisdiction of an irrigation district who may have certain requirements. Okay, so and that occurs even within the City of Brownsville. There may be certain sections that where there may be a fee, for example, and certain requirements. But for the most part, you own a resaca. That's your property. And as far as city ordinance, there may be some specific restrictions in certain resacas where maybe a motorboat may be prohibited, but that's something depending on the location, you'd have to check with city ordinance. Okay, and then ecotourism. Down here in the valley, we're Central and Pacific flyways. A lot of birds migrate through here. The resacas are water resource for wildlife. A lot of wildlife benefits, naturally. Habitat, one of the things that you hear me talk about is we're improving some banks to provide some native vegetation. So the native vegetation helps with wildlife, from not only aquatic to aquatic submersive vegetation, and helps with the wildlife as well. We're resloping some of the banks, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. A quick overview of the operation itself. We began in 2011. Is when we first began our effort. Keeping in mind that Resaca Restoration has been a discussion for many, many years, before 11. But it's not until 2011 that the utility actually began the process of restoring. Created a department in 2011, 2012, brought in some staff. Initially, we used transfer staff from different departments, but ultimately we were granted 18 employees, and we began the staging process. Began dredging in 2013. We've been dredging since then. One of the questions I'm always asked is, well, why did you start there? Or why not Resaca? Well, there was a lot that was taken into account when we began. There was a lot of sampling done throughout the city. This is some of the sampling that took place way back when. Looked at a number of things. And this is some of just the process that we went through. We looked at the community criteria, city-owned versus private-owned. We looked at the connection. There was an effort, still ongoing, downtown revitalization efforts. We looked at access to the use of our dredge, and you'll see why in a minute, and a location for the dewatering system. Looked at the sampling. So a number of things that were taken into account prior to selecting what we call our Phase 1 sites.
Did you find more sediment in the older development?
Oh, for sure.
Versus this new? Okay.
Yeah, and so the town Resaca system, the one which is the oldest, definitely not only, well, let me take that back. More sediment. They're a little bit smaller Resaca, so we might have less sediment, but they were definitely dirtier, a lot more trash, and definitely water qualities was a little not as good as some of the others, for sure. Okay, so these are the dredgers that we've purchased and used. The larger dredge is the upper left corner. That's what we use for our larger resacas. The smaller dredge, what we call our mini dredge up there to the upper right, we use that for smaller confined areas. Go ahead.
How much work has been done on Resaca de la Guerra by the water plant to intake?
At Resaca de la Guerra, dredging, zero. All our effort right now has been at Town Resaca, the Town Resaca system, thus far. The only area that we've dredged is a little area called Parkland, which is PUB owned. So that's about as close as we've done to that.
Did that help out with kind of sludge disposal or any of that effect, or like for water plant too?
Yeah, well, all it is just created, the capacity at the Resaca, but that's really about it. Yeah. But so these are the dredges. Bottom corner over here. This is a dredge that we tried at the first few years, and this was an underwater submergible dredge that you could operate remotely. We tried that at the zoo because the zoo is really confined, little bridges, so you could get this one up here. And ultimately, did not work. We resorted to divers. Yeah, so divers ultimately underwater. That was definitely interesting. A lot slower process. I mean, picture someone underwater removing mud, vacuuming the material, but underwater. So that definitely changed our schedules for sure. So you won't be able to see the dredge for any of you that go out to the dewatering site because it's located further away from the dewatering system. But this is the dredge that we use right now. It's located within the Town Resaca system, just a little further away. We purchased this because it was one of the things here in Brownsville. We have to move from the resacas are cut off by, roads, etc. So we'd have to transport the resacas from location to location. What you have here is a cutter head. This is what's breaking your sediment. These wheels are what we call star wheels. They're what propel you, help you move around. The material you'll see is dredged, and then with the hydraulic pumps, it's pumped to the dewatering system. That's what the cutter heads look like. Hydraulically pumped via floating pipe to our dewatering system. We don't have that dewatering system, but that's the concept. This is our dewatering system. This is, for any of you that are able to attend, what you see here is what we're going to go visit. Dredge in the water of the Resaca. Right now it happens to be maybe about a mile and a half away. And we're pumped via floating pipe to our dewatering system. Here in the dewatering system, the first set of units captures your trash. We have a separator that captures trash, and then it goes on to different units. A mixed tank, then separation. We add polymer during the process, and we collect all the sediment in 14 boxes that we have our dewatering site. The water, the effluent, is returned back to the Resaca. We test the water during the operation. We're testing the water at all times.
What do you do with the sediment?
The sediment gets hauled off to the city landfill, to a temporary disposal site, and we have the permits and authorizations, we the city, to use it as what's called alternate daily cover for the trash. So where the city would typically go dig a pit, use that dirt to cover, they still do that. What we generate isn't sufficient to use as cover. They still create their pits and use that, but this helps supplement that. Essentially, it's recycled.
How fast does the water move through? Is it constant?
Yeah, well, it's the dredge is pumping at about 1,200 gallons per minute. That's what the dredge is pumping at. But for the most part, it's a steady flow, but a lot of times you run into trash or carts or et cetera where we have to stop the dredge. There's a lot of that depending on the Resaca. So you still have some flow going through it because one of the tanks is what's called a mixed tank, and it serves for that very purpose. It helps you collect enough water, sediment, slurry in there, so that's always feeding a consistent flow because we know that the dredge is going to be on, off, on, off, on, off. So in one of our tanks, it helps provide a steady flow to the polymer, the separation process. Does that answer your question? Yes. Okay. Quick video of the dredge. This is when we were over at Dean Porter Park, part of the town Resaca system as well. That's the dredge up ahead, floating pipe. And this is the dredge that we have in the water now. Yeah, the wildlife loves these things, turtles and so forth. So this is the first unit. Water, you see up in the upper left, slurry's coming in. You have a separator. There's your slurry or mud coming in from the dredge. First separator removes, essentially think of it as a shaker, collects removes your larger pieces. We have found all kinds of things. And then it goes on to a second unit. This separates your sand. So you're able to collect finer material, sand, and then ultimately makes it to our polymer system, begin your separation, and then lastly ends up in these 14 boxes, 7 here and 7 on the other side. Effluent, the water goes back to the Resaca. The next day, we come in with our heavy equipment, empty the boxes, load them up, and haul them off. And we do this is on a daily. Next morning, we'll come in. These boxes think of them as baffles that help dewater the process. Remove all those from each of the boxes. We have to clean the ladders, what we call ladders, but baffles. Empty each of the boxes. Jump back in there and clean the boxes. And then load and haul off. It's a process. Yeah. Versus what you saw in the other animation where you're just dumping it into a containment basin. One of the reasons we have to go through this process, this is approved by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, it's because a lot of the Resacas are urban, right? I mean, you're in neighborhoods, so you're limited, and it'd be nice to be able to have that space for a large containment basis where you can fill and then it naturally drains. This is the process that we have because of that. Tight space, small footprint for the dewatering system. Go ahead.
When that came out, it looks like concrete, but what is the primary soil content? Is it sand?
It's a combination of silty, clay, and some sand. And it varies from segment to segment, quite frankly. But for the most part, a lot of it is clay material with silt, sediment, combination of that. So that's really the bulk of what we're getting. Every now and then you may hit a pocket where you get nothing but asphalt that ran off from the street. So,
how much trash is getting removed through this process?
I don't have those cubic yards, but we collect our cubic yards. It's a lot. It's a lot.
Track of what the trash is and how many shopping carts and tires and what's the most ridiculous thing that's been put out.
Yeah.
I mean, I can just imagine the stuff that's been thrown in.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. Somebody was asking me earlier. So cemetery Resaca, for sure. I mean, the first Resaca that we dredged, the very first one was definitely the worst. Over 200 tires in a 2,000 feet segment. 200 tires that were. You drive by it, you may see a tire or two. You'd be amazed at what's underneath. Yeah. And that's just tires, golf carts, furniture, mattresses, you name it. So to answer your question, we keep track of the cubic yards that we collect, and we were also keeping track of tires because there were so many that we said, okay. But other than that, we track like, other interesting things. I think we have a few little interesting things there in the office. I was mentioning earlier that some of these tires are the white wall tires, so they're really a lot older. Some of the bottles and cans are a lot older. You name it. We've cell phones, all kinds of things.
Have you ever run into any resacas with aquatic invasive water plants that are depleting the oxygen in the water?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Have you
run into?
Oh, yes.
Invasive? What do you do with that?
Yeah, and I'll talk a little bit about our project moving forward. But yes, I mean, ultimately, there's a Brazilian pepper tree. It's very invasive, and that's along the resacas. And I'll touch on that a little bit. So these were our phase 1 sites. So off we go. We begin dredging. This little red area is a staging area. This is where the dewatering system's at. But then the very first resaca is what's known as the cemetery resaca. That's where we began. Small segment, over 200 tires. And then Gladys Porter Zoo. This is what we've dredged thus far, and a little more. Sediment removed for that section. There's your tires, and plastics. I should have mentioned plastics. See the dredge, the cutter heads, a lot of plastics, plastic bags, bottles, etc. that we collect, and ultimately that stops your operation. So originally we had a schedule that, we're going to move along this phase. Well, that went out the window from segment 1. Go ahead.
That's what you pretty much answered my question. Will it pick up the tires, or does that stop the machine? And
Yeah.
You have to go and manually pick them up yourself? Or?
I don't know if you noticed, there was a little John boat in one of the videos right next to the dredge. Well, we have a dredge operator dredging, and then we have a second individual in a little John boat, because this happens so frequently. The individual in the little John boat, dredge turns off, goes and has to manually remove your trash. So there's your delay. And off we go again. And so it depends on the resaca. We have, there's been a couple little segments where we're like, wow, this is really clean. But for the most part, you're getting a lot of that. And as far as the tires, some of them, notice how that some of them are intact. These are, for the most part, the ones that made it. Some of them just get tangled. Every now and then you hit a tire the right way and it just pops up. So it just kind of depends. But yeah, that's what we encountered. All right, so on to phase 2. Completed phase 1, we began phase 2. And so for the most part, within phase 2, we've covered this little segment. This little segment here and this segment down here. So we're what we call the zoo extension behind the zoo. Dredge there, dredge this, so we have this pending. And this is important because I'm going to talk about some grant funding, what we call Restore. And hopefully Restore covers funding to finish this off. Okay? And that's zoo extension, that's a little segment right behind the zoo that we've dredged, removed about 6,000 cubic yards.
What's the cost per foot or whatever? Are you getting into that?
Yeah, I'll touch on that. In addition to that, we do some water monitoring. We did some water monitoring prior to and after we dredged. We received some funding from the EPA for water quality monitoring. A couple of grants that we received thus far, where we've had an opportunity to collect some water quality samples. In addition to that, one of the things that we wanted to do was a fish population study, and we did that just to get an idea of what's quantities, the variety of species and so forth. And so we collected that, and then as we dredge, we'll come back and do that just to see the changes. This fish right here, I included this fish. It's called an armored catfish, and these are they're invasive, and they're all over the resacas. They're a South American fish, and the hot water, low oxygen, that's where they thrive. And clearly our resacas are providing that, and they're slowly taking over. And that's something we work with the Parks and Wildlife, and it's a big problem in Florida, and it's a problem here.
What kind of problem do they cause?
Yeah, so for the most part, these don't have a predator, and they're just taking over. They eat away at a lot of the native vegetation that they'll provide habitat and so forth. So they're slowly dominating. Another part of the project, aside from dredging, is our bank improvements. Right now, our primary focus is dredging, but there are instances where we can, and you'll see some work that we did with the Corps where we want to come in and stabilize the banks. So ideally, you have something like a natural vegetation where you have gentler slopes that allows for amphibians to come in and out of water versus your steep slopes. But we can't do that in all locations. Some locations are just too steep. So you resort to some of these other strategies. And we've employed a little bit of the natural sloping and riprap and a little bit of the vegetated terraces. So Cemetery Resaca was the first Resaca that we dredged. So these are some of the improvements that we did. And this one, for example, you didn't have this before. You have rain event, goes into the storm drain. From the storm drain, it went directly to the Resaca. Trash, whatever it was, ran off. Now, it comes in here, it collects, it gives it some time to collect your trash and sediments, etc. And you can't see it here, but there's a box that sits a little higher, overflow box, so that when the water level reaches a certain point, it overflows into the Resaca. So this was something that we were piloting. We were looking at the cost. I mean, clearly that's an expense. How can you do that throughout the city? Clearly you can't do it at every storm drain. But we wanted to get a feel for cost and how we could implement these strategies. Here it is. Here it is with water. Same one with water. Here's your overflow box. Once it reaches a certain level, your water begins to overflow, and it allows for the sediment to lower. A less expensive method is something like that. Gabion, just rocks, help collect from a storm drain, just help collect trash, and allow for your water to run off. Cost a lot less, a lot prettier, definitely costs a bit more. In addition to that part of the project, there's a lot of community outreach. Events such as this. At the Children's Museum, we have an exhibit out there about the Resaca Restoration, the process that we go through. We've done some outreach with schools and different festivals. We have a YouTube page, Facebook, all the social media. There's sections on the project. If anybody wants some additional information, you can go to those. So that's part of the project, because clearly one thing is doing it, but definitely, that outreach to help communicate the fact that these are unique waterways and we got to take care of them. Okay, so back to your cost question. Originally, the capital cost up front, it was a little more expensive, clearly. We had to buy the equipment, a little over $6.7 million right up front, just to buy the dredging, the dewatering system, and so forth. On an annual cost, when we're dredging full-blown every day, it's about $2 million on an annual cost. And here's just an projections, estimated cost for dredging all 3 Resaca systems. That's just a projection based on, depth and pump rates and so forth. About $272 million to dredge the entire systems within Brownsville. So clearly a challenge, right? So one of the goals is to go seek some assistance. And one of the projects we work with is the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. The one little segment, another about 2,000 feet segment, was what we call Resaca Boulevard. A study began a study of what's called a feasibility study in 2015. It was completed a couple years later, and then off we go with design and improvements. Okay, began in 2017. We began the improvements. The study found that just for that segment, it was about $1 million, $1,035,000. And so there was a 65-35 cost share. The Corps pitched in 65, and PUB funded the additional 35. The contract was awarded in 2018, and the improvements were completed in 2020, roughly. And what did that consist of? You were asking about invasive plants and vegetation. Brazilian pepper tree, other invasives listed here along within the resacas. Right? So they take over, don't provide the natural habitat for the wildlife for our area. This is some of the more native planting. The Corps harvested all the plants and provided them, planted them along this segment. Inland plants, riparian plants, and just a couple of the areas. And then some submergent plants. You see, those cages have lilies within the Resaca system. So that's that study, and that we've completed. If you were to drive along Resaca Boulevard, one of the challenges is the education on native vegetation. So that was the goal, and so grass started to grow, right? And you get a lot of calls about who's taking care of those weeds? Who's going to mow those weeds? Because we have no mow zones, because we want the native vegetation to establish and grow. But so education is a big component of it. And so you slowly start explaining, well, this is what it's for and why we're doing this. And every now and then you still get well, I need that mowed. But nevertheless, that's the objective, And clearly, we recognize that we can't do that everywhere. We're not going to do that behind, at people's property, right? We understand that. But these were city-owned property, so that's where we're beginning with city-owned property, and we'll see what other opportunities arise. But we recognize you're not going to go do this behind somebody's backyard. All right, so that was what's called the Continuing Authorities Program, a small pocket of funding available by the Corps. A larger study with the Corps was looking at all the three Resaca systems, the entire three. That was a feasibility, that cost $3 million. Our share was a 50-50 match. Our share was $1.5 million. And the study was completed in 2018, and then the findings were, okay, these are all the improvements we recommend we do throughout the system. The one that we're working on now right here is not color-coded, but the other two systems, those are the pockets where they found there was opportunities not only for dredging, but for bank improvements in some areas. And you'll see that it's not everywhere, because in some areas you have homes. You have areas that are, homes come up to on both sides, so there's no opportunity. A few areas with opportunities. The study, the project made one of the acts, the AWI Act, in 2018. So that's already, via Congress, it's listed as a project of interest. The next step is hopefully getting the funding for the improvements, and I'll talk about the cost. What the study found, the improvements would cost about $202 million to do all that work. They would provide $119 million of that. The non-federal sponsor, City of Brownsville, PUB, we'd be responsible for $64 million. It's a 16-year project, So you can divide our 64 by 16 years, so makes it more tolerable. But nevertheless, that's the cost, the estimated cost. And this is estimated cost now. And one of the things from the course perspective, they make it very clear, if we go improve some land, it must be maintained for 75 years. What the study found is that the habitat that's left within the Resaca systems, the natural communities, which are these three, these are the natural communities. These are pictures here in Brownsville of natural vegetation in certain areas, that we're down to 1% that's left of this type of habitat. So the idea is to protect the 1%, and wherever feasible, go back and bring this type of ecosystem back. And we know that can't be done everywhere, but there are a few pockets left where you want to protect this. And then there's a few areas where there's an opportunity to bring that. But we're essentially down to the last 1% of Resaca habitat, this type of habitat.
Is the city working with new development where there's some balance to be protected?
Yeah. We clearly, the city of Brownsville, we're one of the same. We communicate with each other. We definitely relay the information. They're aware of the project. But specifically, is there a city ordinance in place now? I don't know. I don't know if there's something now that would, restrict the development of. Clearly, when you buy a property, it's your property. But I know for sure that in areas where it's city property, there's definitely an effort to at least protect. If in fact it has this type of environment, there's definitely an effort to protect that.
Do you all know right now, like everything that's addressed, how long would it be before it builds up again? Do you all have to do it again?
Yeah. Again, this has happened over years and years. The more we develop within the city of Brownsville and less protection we have from stormwater interceptors, clearly the potential for more sediment making it back in there. So the more we able to use some of these strategies to prevent that runoff, sediment runoff, clearly the longer. But to answer your question specifically, our goal right now is just to go dredge as much as we can, come back and return and do it again. And hopefully, by as we move along, maybe processes, dredging processes and dewatering processes improve, where it doesn't take us as long as it takes now.
Hopefully, you'll find this entire thing.
Yeah. And that's funny you say that, because after we dredge that segment, clearly we feel we've removed everything. It's not too long after that you find another tire there. So it's education. We have to educate, continue educating. So back to this study. Again, over $202 million over 16 years. That was the findings. So now we're moving on to the design of 16 years. Think of it as, or let's call it contract one. And the first contract is an area down in South Brownsville, what's known as the Jagu Resaca down there. It has an older bridge. And so this is just a rendering. But that's an area where we're beginning to design for the improvements for that area. A unique features there are these Montezuma cypresses that you find in a few other areas, but that one happens to have a little, a nice group of Montezuma cypress that have been around for quite some time.
What's the timeline for that to be completed?
Right now, we anticipate the design to take at least a year and a half, and then depending on funding from Congress, Corps on down, The construction itself should not take more than a year construction.
Because those trees cannot be without water for too long.
Yeah, one of the things that we do now, we actually, quite frankly, we hadn't done it in quite some time, but we began adding water, several times a year, at least to keep them fed. Right now, when you add water there, it drains. It'll stay there for a little while, but then it drains. And if anything, we're at least providing water to the root system. And the reason it drains is because it's not at the bottom. You don't have the clay lining that you'd like to have to capture that water. But that's part of the improvements. Having some pumping system designed so that we're able to feed water regularly. Right now, the way we feed that water is via an irrigation district. And the irrigation district doesn't always have the water availability. So it's sporadic. So really what we're after is finding a long-term solution with the pump system that we're able to feed that a lot faster and easier. In addition to resloping the banks and adding clay liners, coming in, removing invasive vegetation, and then adding native. So, and again here, city property. I mean, some areas, but for the most part, city property.
Hey, Rene, are the Montezuma cypresses, are they native? And also, is that how resacas historically looked before people came in and started tearing out the trees?
Yeah, and so clearly I'd refer you to Gene for that, but I believe that down, there's a stretch that came up to a certain area, but clearly they've been around forever. So whether they're specifically native to this area, not 100% certain, but we know, there's a nice stretch going into Mexico, and the ones that are here have been here for a long time. So if Jagu may be a representation of that, but I definitely refer you to Gene.
I've been to the state World Urban Center here in the state, I forget what it's called. But anyway, the resacas are one of them at least. You could see several inches to the bottom.
Yeah.
I mean, because there's no, I guess, drainage in there.
Right. Yeah. Depends.
I imagine they were beautiful at one time
Sure.
before development because it was clear.
Yeah. Yeah, there are some, yeah, exactly. Some areas that we're surrounded by streets and homes, and in some areas, clearly you even see that as you go further east. Some of the resacas further east that are a little more rural, where you still have some farming, you may not see a lot of the habitat, but they're clearly wider, they're a little bit cleaner, a little bit deeper, versus some something surrounded by buildings and homes. So that's work with the Corps. This is work with the state, the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality. This is back in 2010. There was the Deepwater Horizon oil spill in the Gulf that resulted in a lot of damage right to the coast. As a result of that, there's funding available for environmental improvements. And the TCEQ are the ones, this is funding from the U.S. Treasury that is managed here in Texas by this agency, Texas Commission on Environmental Quality. There's different buckets of funding available. We qualify under bucket 1. And at the time, there was $97 million available. There's probably more now. So we applied for this back in 2016. So it's a lengthy process. We applied in 2016. Originally, our request was we need $43 million because we wanted clearly to do a lot more. Ultimately, it was, they got back with us. All right, $43 million is they asked us to phase it out. So we phased it out over 9 years. And so we've just been awarded not just here in 2020, we were awarded $4.6 million for this very effort. Dredging, bank improvements, some weirs, and stormwater interceptors. So when we applied in 2016, we were actually dredging elsewhere, And we knew that we wanted to get, eventually we were going to get to this second section that we have in what we call our phase 2, and that's what will be funded. When I say we were awarded in 2020, that's when we received your award letter. But in between then and now, there's a lot of requirements you have to meet, and we're still working on those requirements. There's permitting, there's property ownership easements, and a lot of that's required. But this is what that funding will help with. Dredging in blue, dark blue, bank improvements, that lime green, and then stormwater interceptors in all these little red dots just upstream, just in that area. And those stormwater interceptors, instead of having just a regular drain, storm drain, water in, out, these stormwater interceptors essentially will replace the storm drains, and they help capture sediment. Same principle where you collect sediment, water rises, water overflows, it gives you an opportunity to collect trash and sediment.
So there's no sumps for that? It just does it naturally?
The rain, for the most part, in most places, when they end up in storm drains, we do have drainage systems like the canals, the main drain. A lot of them drain there, so let me take that back. But some areas, depending on where the neighborhood, will drain into the Resaca. But the city does have a drainage system that consists of the north main drain and then another larger system to collect some of that. So not all of it goes into the Resacas. So back to we were awarded in 2020. We're finalizing our permitting for that particular project, and we're hoping to begin here soon. I say November, now I just say soon, because I've been saying we'll be there next month, and we're hoping to start the project here really soon. That segment once we were able to start, is a 2-year project, just dredging around that bend and the bank improvements and so forth. It'll also help fund 18 staff members, and it consists of dredging, bank improvements, some weirs. We will actually be replacing 2 weirs in the area and a gate valve. Bank improvements and 12 stormwater interceptors in that area. Because after you dredge, what you want to do is you definitely want to protect that investment, and the stormwater interceptors will help with minimizing the sediment going back into that area. That was it. Any questions?